West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy with Chef Justice Putnam. Netrootsradio.com.
Je voudrais du soleil vert, des dentelles et des théères, des photos de bord de mer, dans mon jardin d'hiver. Je voudrais de la lumière, comme en Nouvelle-Angleterre. Je veux changer d'atmosphère, dans mon jardin d'hiver. Ma fleur sous la pluie de novembre, tes mains qui courent, je n'en peux plus de t'attendre. Les années passent, il est loin, là je tombe. Nul ne peut nous entendre. Je voudrais du Fred Astaire, revoir un latte.
What about Ginny Thomas? That's one of the questions the country has a right to ask after the Chief Justice of the United States, John Roberts, issued a public report today on the Supreme Court's investigation of the leak of the draft opinion that overturned Roe versus Wade last year. In his cover statement about the report, the Chief Justice said, the team has to date been unable to identify a person responsible for by a preponderance of the evidence. No one questioned Ginny Thomas. No one questioned any of the spouses of any of the Supreme Court justices. No one questioned the justices themselves in this investigation of the Supreme Court. Samuel Alito, the author of the opinion, and his wife were credibly accused last year of having a private dinner in their home with a wealthy anti-abortion activist couple who got advance word during that dinner of a previous Supreme Court decision. But even though Samuel Alito and his wife have been publicly identified as potential leaks of a previous Supreme Court opinion, they were not questioned in this investigation. The Chief Justice assigned the investigation to the Marshal of the Supreme Court and her staff, none of whom have ever had to conduct an investigation at the Supreme Court before. The Marshal of the Supreme Court, Gail Curley, has the following duties: overseeing the operations of the Supreme Court building, including space management, maintenance, and cleaning, renovation, property and supplies, procurement and contracting, telecommunications, parking, managing the motor pool, and coordinating most events at the court, and manages the courtroom, including seating, security, recording proceedings, and keeping time of oral counsel. Investigating leaks at the Supreme Court is not one of the jobs of the Marshal of the Supreme Court. But that's who John Roberts decided should do this investigation. It was John Roberts' personal decision at the outset to assign this investigation to people who had no competence or experience to do it. The Marshal's report says the investigators, quote, conducted 126 formal interviews of 97 employees, all of whom denied disclosing the opinion. Despite these efforts, investigators have been unable to determine at this time, using a preponderance of the evidence standard, the identity of the person who disclosed the draft majority opinion in Dobbs versus Jackson Women's Health Organization, or how the draft opinion was provided to Politico. 97 employees were interviewed. Quote, the investigators determined that 80 personnel received or had access to electronic copies of the draft opinion. 34 personnel confirmed they printed out copies of the draft opinion, and 4 were unsure. Many printed out more than one copy. The investigators informed all witnesses that they had a duty to answer questions about their conduct as employees, that disciplinary action, including dismissal, could be undertaken if they refused to answer or failed to answer fully and truthfully. You cannot fire a Supreme Court justice. No matter what the justice might say in an interview like that, if you interviewed a justice, you could never fire the justice. But no justices were interviewed, and that line proves that no justices were interviewed. We must infer from this report that no Supreme Court justice and no spouse of a Supreme Court justice was interviewed, because the report does not specifically say that, so we have to infer that. But the report never even hints at the possibility that any Supreme Court justice or spouse was interviewed. At the conclusion of the initial interviews, each employee was asked to sign an affidavit under penalty of perjury affirming that he or she did not disclose the Dobbs draft opinion to any person not employed by the Supreme Court. Each of these employees signed a sworn affidavit. A few of those interviewed admitted to telling their spouses about the draft opinion or vote count, so they annotated their affidavits to that effect. The interviews provided very few leads concerning who may have publicly disclosed the document. The report says that the investigators studied, quote, any connections between employees and reporters, and the report says this. Investigators also carefully evaluated whether personnel may have had reason to disclose the court's draft decision for strategic reasons. And the report found nothing to indicate there was any strategic reason for the leak. And despite a Supreme Court investigation by the Marshal of the Supreme Court that found no strategic reason for the leak, the Chief Justice of the United States declared in writing that the leak was a protest of the decision. The second line of the Chief Justice's cover statement releasing the report says the leak was no mere misguided attempt at protest. It was a grave assault on the judicial process. So there is Chief Justice John Roberts leaping far beyond the evidentiary findings of his investigator's own report and claiming that there was indeed a strategic reason for this leak, and the strategic reason for the leak was a misguided attempt at protest of the decision. The leak was a protest of the decision, according to John Roberts. And that is an outrageous stretch beyond the evidence by Chief Justice John Roberts, accusing the opponents of the decision as having leaked the decision. Now, there was plenty of analysis at the time of which side could strategically profit by the leak of the decision, and most analysts agree that the leak of the decision strategically helped the author of the decision, Samuel Alito, to maintain his majority vote, to lock in place the majority vote for repealing Roe versus Wade. And it did lock the court in place. When the opinion was officially released, it was virtually identical word for word to the leaked opinion, and not a single vote changed. The Chief Justice of the United States ordered an investigation to find out who leaked the opinion and why. His investigation did not find out who leaked the opinion, but the Chief Justice has decided, all by himself, without any evidence at all, why the opinion was leaked. The Chief Justice of the United States calls it a misguided attempt at protest, and the Chief Justice does not even sign his name to that statement that he wrote today. He simply calls it a statement of the court, but it's impossible that that statement could have been written by anyone other than the Chief Justice, which is patently obvious in the very first line of the statement. In May 2022, this court suffered one of the worst breaches of trust in its history. Would any Chief Justice assign the writing of that statement to any other justice. One of the most important events in the history of the court, according to this statement. What is lost in this statement and in this investigation is what the official release of the actual opinion did in this country. There is no analysis of the 10-year-old girls who have been harmed by the actual official opinion of the Supreme Court. Chief Justice John Roberts and the majority of the Supreme Court have no interest whatsoever in the real price that has to be paid every day in this country now by women and girls who have suffered one of the worst breaches of trust in the history of this country at the hands of the Republican majority on the Supreme Court.
It is Friday, the 20th of January of 2022, and you are in West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. I am your chef de cuisine, Justice Putnam. Gunner the English Bulldog is our snoozing sous chef, and our daily special is Blue Moon Spirits Fridays, because we are all Nighthawks in the Diner of Life. Well, how are you today? Yes, even more sad news as icons from our youth move on to the great beyond. David Crosby passed yesterday at the age of 81, and he was quite a prolific tweeter there. He was tweeting the day before, I think it was the day or the day of, but certainly the day before. He had been, before his passing, he was putting it to the evil powers that want to, well, take over everything, and they're evil, so, and we know who they are. So, yeah, I used to have a lot of jokes about David Crosby, but he, everybody has their issues and their demons and whatnot. But anyway, I feel a little bit like Zelig. I was like right there in the periphery of a lot of stuff. I lived in Mill Valley when David Crosby was seemed to be habitually pulled over by the cops. The Marin County sheriffs would set up a little I don't know what do they call it, a speed trap. Yeah, and the Mill Valley cops too. So they sort of did a little tag team. I got pulled over by him one time, and I guess I was just small fry, so they let me go so they could get somebody a lot more famous. Maybe Huey Lewis, who sometimes came to Mill Valley to sit in the Sweetwater. A lot of people did. Of course, he had his own bar, there and, up the road a ways. Anyway, so, yeah, we would see old David Crosby, getting pulled over. And why would we? Because sometimes we would be playing at the Sweetwater or sometimes just sitting and listening to the performances. Anyway, he wasn't the only one that got pulled over in those days. I guess they were celebrity hunting, weren't they? Sure seemed like it. Okay, so that was somewhat sad news. 81. Doesn't seem so old anymore. It really bugs me. Boy, I remember thinking how old Elvis Presley was when he died. He just seemed ancient to me when he died. And I was like in my 20s. And he was only like about 41. So, everything is relative. I wish I had thought about it a little bit more, because I just presumed that we would have the limberness of our youth, and apparently we don't. We become brittle in bone and temperament. Isn't it true? Well, outside of that, what else do we have going on? I heard that the NRCC ghosted George Santos, off of their website. Took it right off. Now, I got to tell you, the Kremlin used to do that before. First they would disappear him from all the public records, and the next thing you would know, what little you would know, is that they accidentally fell out of a 5-story window conveniently. That happens a lot. Or they had a heart attack, and there was no reason for them to have a heart attack. Or a convenient mugging. in the lobby of their apartment building that had never had a mugging before, except for the last time that some political dissident got in the way. So we'll see. Sometimes not even political dissidents, just people that they need to clean up. Yep. It looks to me like old George Santos needs a little cleaning up. Oh, boy. They really think, and when I say they, I mean with a capital T. All right? When they try to put things into motion, they think that we as Americans are really stupid because of the people they're dealing with. People stupid enough to go and sit in Putin's orbit or not the cross-section of the United States of America. Hasn't anyone seen the original Red Dawn? I mean, come on. Got a country of Patrick Swayze's out there. Come on. Okay, well, we warned them, and they just decided to push. Being the son of a historian, I was well aware of the content of Rachel Maddow's newest podcast, Ultra, about the German Bund here in the United States of America. We actually called it the American Bund. Yeah, they were Nazis. And I used to bring up Prescott Bush a lot back in the day, and people would look at me and go, what? That's how memory hold it got. In just that short amount of time. Yep. But I guess I was lucky because my dad was an historian, and if he didn't tell me directly, there were books there in which it would pique my interest, and then I would ask a question, and then he would point me to, well, some more resource material. That's what makes a great teacher. Never answer a student's question. Point them to the right books. And I say books, plural. All right. So I read them. And I got to say, my friends and I back in the day, we were well aware of this content that is being pushed out as if it's an unknown, and it was. We talked about it. We didn't use the term memory hole, but we talked about that concept back in the day when we were in mere junior high. Seems so obvious. Something that we thought it can't happen here. Oh, no, it can't happen here. Well, we were Zappa freaks, and we knew that if Zappa said it can't happen here, it means it can. And he was right. Okay, well, let's see. Oh, my gosh, we're just burning up time on a Friday, and we have actually a bit of a read for you today, at least some interesting ones. We think so in the royal we. As we start off here at the Bistro Cafe of West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. Yeah, well, the reason they had the janitor, I know they call her the court marshal, but she's also the janitor. Please. And scheduler, too. The reason they had the janitor investigate the court leaks is because John Roberts knows if they let the Ginny out of the bottle, bad things will happen. They already have. On the rest of the menu, a Georgia school district lowered a black student's GPA from all A's to all C's after he reported racist Snapchats. T-Mobile says the data on 37 million customers has been stolen. And climate misinformation rockets out of control on Musk's Twitter. After the break, we move to the chef's table where Peru police used tear gas to block thousands of protesters from marching in the capital city of Lima. Meanwhile, over 1 million people marched in the streets of Paris and other French cities against raising the retirement age. All that and more on West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. Bon appetit. at netrootsradio.com. To the right of the page is the chat room link, and the chat room is monitored by Kelly Lincoln. Thank you, Kelly. To the left of that chat room link, across the page there at the, well, near the bottom of our homepage at netrootsradio.com. And actually a little bit below, if you went directly across to the left of the page, is the link to our Patreon page. And if you could become a recurring Patreon of Netroots Radio, you know what that does? That helps us pay our bills and will offset the, I got to tell you, the MacBook Pro is not cheap. At least, well, it's not inexpensive. It's definitely not cheap. But it was a bit of an outlay of money, but we have you to thank for allowing us to, well, put a big dent in that purchase. Big enough for us, but we still need help because the bills keep coming on in, and they never go down. Okay, they might stay the same for a while, but they always tend to go up, but never down. Anyway, all of that stated, if you could maybe send us what you might spend on an espresso-type coffee drink, if you're not already doing it, because you already know this spiel. Everybody does. Anyway, if you could send those funds our way, we can then put those in a kitty and puts, like I said, a big dent in the cost of what it is to run this powerhouse of resistance. And we thank you for your generosity. If you would like to follow Netroots Radio on Twitter, do so at Netroots Radio. We're also on Mastodon. And I suppose it would be nice if we boosted membership or follows or whatever they call it over there. But Tom takes care of that and the Twitter feed. Thanks, Tom. But go to Mastodon at netrootsradio.mstdn plus, or is it .plus? I don't know. Mastodon plus Netroots Radio. You'll find us. Thank you for doing so. You can follow me on Twitter at Justice Putnam. I will get a Mastodon account real soon. Sooner than I expect, apparently. Anyway, follow me on Twitter at Justice Putnam. I post the show notes and links diary on Daily Co's 10 minutes before showtime, and that's where you can find the full articles as they are. And if you would like to follow the show on Twitter, do so at Cookbook West and pick up podcasts by way of Spreaker, Stitcher, TuneIn, iHeart, YouTube, iTunes, and wherever podcasts can be found. Okay, let us now delve into this first offering here in the Bistro Cafe of West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. Blue Moon Spirits Fridays. Oh, I failed to mention that the French 77s are virtually poured, mixed and poured, and ready for your virtual imbibing. All right, this first offering here in the Bistro Cafe is by Benjamin Payne out of, he's with the Georgia Public Broadcasting Group there. New allegations were added to a federal lawsuit against Effingham County School District in southeast Georgia, alleging retaliation by the district against a black student for reporting racist and threatening Snapchat messages sent by white students. As Georgia Public Broadcasting first reported last week, 3 black high school students have sued the Effingham County School District, alleging a litany of civil rights violations. The plaintiffs have since amended their lawsuit to include Isaiah Job Wynn as a plaintiff, who is identified as a former student at South Effingham High School. South Effingham High School, I just love saying that, is located about 15 miles northwest of Savannah. Job Wynn alleges that the district retaliated against him for reporting leaked Snapchat messages in February of 2020 sent by white students that included the N-word and threats to assassinate them, execute them, set tasers to kill, cut off their toes every time they run away, and we're going to teach them about Americas. In response, according to the lawsuit, he was admonished for reporting the messages to high school administrators and was ordered to write an apology. After speaking with news outlets about the Snapchat messages, Job Wynn claims that the high school undertook a retaliation spree against him, after which he decided to transfer to a different school district. Upon transferring, the Effingham, I just love that, Effingham County School District withheld his transcripts for almost 3 to 4 months. Once the transcripts were sent, the district had, quote, wrongfully and unlawfully, end quote, altered them such that A's were changed to C's to drastically drop his GPA. And that was also part of the quote. Additionally, bogus disciplinary infractions were added to his record when, in fact, his record had been impeachable, all according to the filing. The lawsuit claims that Job Wynn confronted the district about this, after which the district claimed that, they were errors. The transcripts and disciplinary record were ultimately corrected, but only after being vigorously challenged by Job Wynn. Effingham County School District Superintendent Yancey Ford, who was named as a defendant in the lawsuit in his official capacity, along with the district's 5 board members in their official capacities, responded to Georgia Public Broadcasting's request for comment by email. They said, "Neither the school district nor other named defendants have been served with this lawsuit at this time. Once we have been served, a response to the allegations will be filed in accordance with the rules and procedures of the court." Bajak of the Associated Press brings us this next offering here in the Bistro Cafe of West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. The U.S. wireless carrier T-Mobile said yesterday, Thursday, that an unidentified malicious intruder breached its network in late November and stole data on 37 million customers, including addresses, phone numbers, and dates of birth. T-Mobile said in a filing with the U.S. Securities and Exchange Commission that the breach was discovered on January 5th. It said the data exposed to theft, based on its investigation to date, did not include passwords or PINs, bank account or credit card information, social security numbers, or other government IDs. T-Mobile said it has notified law enforcement and federal agencies, which it did not name. It did not immediately respond to an email seeking comment. The company has been hacked multiple times in recent years. In its filing, T-Mobile said it did not expect the latest breach to have material impact on its operations. But a senior analyst for Moody's Investors Service, Neil Mack, said in a statement that the breach raises questions about the management's cyber governance and could alienate customers and attract scrutiny by the FCC and other regulators. While these cybersecurity breaches may not be systemic in nature, their frequency and occurrence at T-Mobile is an alarming outlier relative to telecom peers, Mack said. In July, T-Mobile agreed to pay $350 million to customers who filed a class action lawsuit after the company disclosed in August of 2021 that personal data, including social security numbers and driver's license info, had been stolen. Nearly 80 million U.S. residents were affected. It said at the time that it would spend $150 million through 2023 to fortify its data security and other technologies. Maybe they should have spent more. Prior to the August 2021 intrusion, the company disclosed breaches in January of 2021, November of 2019, and August in 2018, in which customer information was accessed. T-Mobile, based in Bellevue, Washington, became one of the country's largest cell phone carriers in 2020 after buying rival Sprint. It reported having more than 102 million customers after the merger. Klepper of the Associated Press brings us this final offering here in the Bistro Cafe of West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy Blue Moon Spirits Fridays. Search for the word climate on Twitter, and the first automatic recommendation isn't climate crisis or climate jobs or even climate change, but instead climate scam. Clicking on the recommendation yields dozens of posts denying the reality of climate change and making misleading claims about efforts to mitigate it. Such misinformation has flourished on Twitter since it was bought by Elon Musk last year, but the site isn't the only one promoting content the scientists and environmental advocates say undercuts public support for policies intending to respond to a change. What's happening in the information ecosystem poses a direct threat to action, said Jenny King, head of climate research and response at the Institute for Strategic Dialogue, a London-based nonprofit. It plants those seeds of doubt and makes people think maybe there is not scientific consensus. The Institute is part of a coalition of environmental advocacy groups that, on Thursday yesterday, released a report tracking climate change disinformation in the months before, during, and after the UN Climate Summit in November. The report faulted social media platforms for, among other things, failing to enforce their own policies prohibiting climate change misinformation. It is only the latest to highlight the growing problem of climate misinformation on Twitter. Meta, which owns Facebook and Instagram, allowed nearly 4,000 advertisements on its site, most bought by fossil fuel companies, that dismissed the scientific consensus that's behind climate change and criticized efforts to respond to it, the researchers found. In some cases, the ads and the posts cited inflation and economic fears as reason to oppose climate policies while ignoring the costs of inaction. Researchers also found that a significant number of the accounts posting false claims about climate change also spread misinformation about U.S. elections, COVID-19, and vaccines in general. Now, Twitter did not respond to questions from the AP. A spokesperson for Meta cited the company's policy prohibiting ads that have been proven false by its fact-checking partners, a group that includes the AP. The ads identified in the report had not been fact-checked. Under Musk, Twitter laid off thousands of employees and made changes to its content moderation that its critics said undercut the effort. In November, the company announced it would no longer enforce its policy against COVID-19 misinformation. Musk also reinstated many formerly banned users, including several who had spread misleading claims about climate change. Instances of hate speech and attacks on LGBTQ people have soared. Tweets containing climate scam or other terms linked to climate change denial rose 300% in 2022. And while Twitter had labeled some of the content as misinformation, many of the popular posts were not labeled. Musk's new verification system could be part of the problem, according to a report from the Center for Countering Digital Hate, another organization that tracks online misinformation. Previously, the blue check marks were held by people in the public eye, such as journalists, government officials, or celebrities. Now anyone willing to fork over $8 a month can seek a check mark. Posts and replies from verified accounts are given an automatic boost on the platform, making them more visible than content from users who don't pay. While researchers at the Center for Countering Digital Hate analyzed accounts verified after Musk took over, they found they spread 4 times the amount of climate change misinformation compared with users verified before Musk's purchase. Verification systems are typically created to assure users that the accounts they follow are legitimate. Twitter's new system, however, makes no distinction between authoritative sources on climate change and anyone with $8 and an opinion. And that was according to Imran Ahmed, the center's chief executive. We found, Ahmad said, it has in fact put rocket boosters on the spread of lies and disinformation. Indeed. All right, let us now get to our break, and when we get back from that break, we will go through weather from around the world, and we will finish up with the stories that we have curated for you today. You are listening to West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy, and we will be right back.
You are listening to netrootsradio.com.
Please hang up and try again.
From a point at sea to the circles of your mind, a new force is at work for planetary transformation. New radio for a new Earth.
This is Take Two Movie Review. I'm Mike Friend. This week, Instant Icon. Imagine for a minute a cross-studio mashup of Chucky going up against a connected, state-of-the-art android with a titanium and composite body. Mysterious possession versus programming gone awry. The granddad of possessed movie dolls versus the new kid. It'd be neat. So now, from the horror factory Blumhouse and James Wan, who gave us 2014's Annabelle, we have Megan, the Model 3 generative android created by Gemma, a designer for a toy company, who, thanks to a tragic car accident, becomes the guardian of 10-year-old Katie. Totally unprepared for such duty, Gemma deploys the Megan project that she'd been ordered to sideline by her tech bro boss to tend to Katie. The project had been intended as a learning-capable companion for kids, so why not kill 2 birds? Now, the rest of the movie is basically the answer to the question, what could possibly go wrong? Among those who learn the answer are the Karen and her mean dog next door, a bully who goes after Katie on a playground, the toy company, which had become reinterested in Megan after seeing her, or it, in action with Katie, and then eventually Gemma. The doll and how it's made up and dressed and how it dances are pitch-perfect absurdum as brought off by 12-year-old New Zealand dancer Amy MacDonald, the voice of Jenna Davis, and no CGI. So are the send-ups of electronic babysitting, tech culture, and indeed the culture at large, as Megan, often non-contextually, imports her knowledge of the world. There are enough jump tricks and violence to keep Megan rooted in the horror genre, but it's largely camp comedy for a PG-13 audience, and it works. While we may never see Chucky and Megan on screen together, this one's real sequel's already been greenlit. This has been Take Two Movie Review. I'm Mike Friend. Catch up with us at TakeTwoMovieReview.com and feed us back on our channel on YouTube.
is Scientific American's 60-Second Science. I'm Karen Hopkin. Ever notice that some music just really makes you want to dance? Well, a new study shows that it is, indeed, all about the bass. Because researchers have found that during a concert, boosting the bass bumps up the boogieing. The results appear in the journal Current Biology.
Music and musical rhythm have been kind of fascinating to me for a long time, since I was a kid. And in particular, the way that they make us feel.
Daniel Cameron is a postdoctoral fellow at McMaster University. He also plays drums.
As a drummer, you're interested in making the crowd want to move and feel good and give a good, pleasurable time feel. And this is related to the work I do in science.
Cameron and his colleagues want to understand how music can engender an almost irrepressible urge to feel our bodies in motion.
And we knew from anecdotal evidence and other experimental evidence that there was an association between bass and dancing.
So people who enjoy electronic dance music, or EDM, report that the thrumming bass produces a sensation that makes them want to move. And some studies have shown that our movements are more fine-tuned when we're locked onto bass notes.
So for example, if you have people tap along to a sequence of tones, their tapping is slightly more accurate. They're more synchronized when those tones are low in frequency compared to high in frequency.
So the researchers set out to determine,
if you add more bass to music, will it cause more dancing?
Now, they didn't want to manipulate the bass line in a way that was obvious, because then people might consciously decide to step up their stepping out.
That might be interesting.
But it would also muddy the results, like if someone in a drug trial knows they're getting the real deal and not a placebo.
So we wanted to do a subtle manipulation, a very consciously undetectable manipulation.
So they broke out a set of very, very low-frequency speakers.
These are specialized speakers, kind of like subwoofers. People might have subwoofers as part of their stereo system, and these are speakers that play even lower frequencies than most systems are able to do. Even lower frequencies than we think are typically able to be heard.
With their special speakers set up, the researchers staged a concert.
We had the electronic music duo Orphix come to our live lab.
That's live, L-I-V-E, for Large Interactive Virtual Environment. It's like a cross between a performance space and a laboratory.
The people who came to the show were fans of the group. They wanted to come and see EDM. They wanted to dance. And while they were there, we asked if they wanted to volunteer in our experiment. And a good number of people signed up.
Recruits adorned themselves with headbands bearing motion capture reflectors, which the researchers used to track their movements.
And then what we did was just, during the concert, turn these very low-frequency speakers on and leave them on for 2.5 minutes, turn them off, leave them off for 2.5 minutes, back on for 2.5 minutes, off for 2.5 minutes, on, off, throughout the concert.
Now, you can't hear when the speakers are switched on. And based on the surveys filled out after the show, and a follow-up study of the manipulated audio clips, neither could the concert-goers. But their feet sure knew something was up.
And what we found was, by looking at the motion capture data, people just moved more. They covered more ground, they moved faster when the low-frequency speakers were on. So this tells us that the extra bass, these very, very low frequencies, cause more moving.
About 12% more moving and grooving. So the concert and the experiment were a success. And best of all,
people enjoyed the concert, and the more people moved, the more they enjoyed the concert.
Which shouldn't be a surprise.
Dancing and pleasure really go hand in hand together. It's something we like to do with music. It's a pleasurable response, and we show with this work that bass is part of that mix.
Next up, Cameron says he'd like to look at whether bass can help bring us together.
So people are more likely to feel good about one another and help one another if they've had some experience synchronizing their movements together. And dance is a great, fun way to do this. And this might be related to why we find dance in all cultures and throughout history for the human species. It's a fundamental part of being human.
So, to cut down on conflict, maybe just crank up the bass and cut up the dance floor. For Scientific American's 60-Second Science, I'm Karen Hopkin.
This is the story of a very special woman. In a matter of seconds, she turned herself into a great mathematician or an entrepreneur. Her knowledge was limitless and still is. She could also make monsters disappear, especially those that lurked in the shadows under the bed. Once, this woman put back together a teenage girl's broken heart, which had been shattered in 1,000 pieces, just by giving her a bear hug. She masqueraded as a regular person at work, but as a superhero at home. Everyone knows her as Gabriella. I still call her Mom.
Your hero needs you now, and AARP is here to help. Find the care guides you need to help, complete with tips and resources at aarp.org/caregiving. A public service announcement brought to you by AARP and the Ad Council.
Hi, I'm Tom Hartman, and since you're listening to netrootsradio.com, show your progressive side and go to the donate button on the bottom of the homepage. It's progressives like you who power Netroots Radio and keep the progressive message beaming everywhere 24 hours a day. Just go to our donate button at the bottom of netrootsradio.com. Thank you for keeping progressive radio at full power.
Change the Pledge of Allegiance? I'm Bill Newman, and this is the Civil Liberties Minute. The original pledge, written by Socialist Minister Ralph Bellamy in 1892, was, "I pledge allegiance to my flag, and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all." In the 1920s, the words, "the flag of the United States of America," were substituted for "my flag," a minor tinker. Then, in 1954, at President Eisenhower's urging, in order to combat godless communism, Congress inserted the words "under God" into the pledge. One nation under God, not a minor tinker. In the early 2000s, the majority of the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals ruled that the words "under God" were unconstitutional, just as the words "under Zeus" or "under no God" or "under Jesus" would have been. However, in 2004, the Supreme Court preserved "under God" in the pledge by ruling that the father who had brought the case for his elementary school daughter lacked legal standing because the student's mother got sole legal custody in the divorce. The issue of "under God" in the pledge has not been back to the Supreme Court since. Alfred T. Goodwin, the federal judge who wrote the appeals court opinion that ruled the pledge unconstitutional, died last December 27th at the age of 99. Judge Goodwin will be remembered as a jurist who stood up for principle. The Civil Liberties Minute is made possible by the ACLU because freedom can't protect itself.
I'm Rick Smith, and this is Labor History in 2. On this day in labor history, the year was 1986. That was the first time Dr. Martin Luther King Day was observed as a national holiday. A powerful voice for civil rights, Dr. King was assassinated in 1968 in Memphis, Tennessee, while standing on the second floor of the Lorraine Motel. He was in Memphis standing up for the rights of black garbage collectors. Dr. King gave his life supporting those fighting for union recognition. Throughout his work as a civil rights leader, Dr. King spoke powerfully of the importance of unions. Addressing a group of Teamsters in 1967, he said, "Union recognition meant the real beginning. Union meant strength, and recognition meant the employer's acknowledgement of that strength." Perhaps his most stirring reflections on the labor movement came in a speech he delivered to the AFL-CIO in Springfield, Illinois in 1965. King said, "The two most dynamic movements that reshaped the nation during the past 3 decades are the labor and civil rights movements. Our combined strength is potentially enormous. We have not used a fraction of it for our own good or for the need of society as a whole. If we make the war on poverty a total war, if we seek higher standards for all workers for an enriched life, we have the ability to accomplish it, and our nation has the ability to provide it. If our two movements unite their social pioneering initiative 30 years from now, people will look back on this day and honor those who had the vision to see the full possibilities of modern society and the courage to fight for their realization. On that day, the brotherhood of man, undergirded by economic security, will be a thrilling and creative reality.
Thank you for accompanying us here to the Chef's Table at West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy Blue Moon Spirits Fridays. We always begin weather from around the world along the banks of the Rogue River in the Rogue River Valley of Southern Oregon on the west coast of the continental United States of America, where it is currently 33 degrees Fahrenheit. Expecting a high actually in the upper 40s, which seems a bit warmer than what we've had. Partly cloudy skies throughout the day with winds light and variable. Clear to partly cloudy tonight with lows in the mid to upper 20s. Winds light and variable. And then partly cloudy skies tomorrow, Saturday. Highs in the upper 40s, low 50s. Winds remaining light and variable. Pollen is still rated as none here in the town of Rogue River. The air quality index for the region is in the good range at 26 parts per billion. And the daytime UV index is low at level 2. Barometric pressure is rising at 30.47 inches. Visibility is at 8 miles. And relative humidity is at 93%. Weather from around the world is brought to you by a crowd of crowdsourced weather stations that a crowd crowdsources from around the world. London is 42 degrees and partly cloudy. Paris is 43 and mostly cloudy with a flood watch. Rome is 44 and partly cloudy. Kyiv is 46 and mostly cloudy. Kabul is 22 and partly cloudy. Hong Kong is 62 degrees and fair. Tokyo is 45 and clear. Sydney, Australia is 65 degrees and mostly cloudy. San Francisco, California is 46 degrees and sunny with a small craft advisory on the bay and offshore. And New York, New York is 48 degrees Fahrenheit and mostly cloudy. And that is weather from around the world, brought to you by a crowd of crowdsourced weather stations that a crowd crowdsources from around the world. Franklin Bricenio of the Associated Press brings us this first amuse-bouche here at the Chef's Table at West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. Lima police fired tear gas to try to subdue thousands of protesters who poured into the Peruvian capital yesterday, Thursday, many from remote Andean regions calling for the ouster of President Dina Boluarte and the return to power of her predecessor, whose removal last month launched deadly unrest and cast the nation into political chaos. The demonstrators gathered in Lima's historic downtown, scuffled with security forces who barred them from reaching key government buildings, including Congress, as well as business and residential districts of the capital. Besides Boluarte's resignation, the supporters of former President Pedro Castillo were demanding the dissolution of Congress and immediate elections. Castillo, Peru's first leader from a rural Andean background, was impeached after a failed attempt to dissolve Congress. For much of the day, the protests played out as a cat-and-mouse game with demonstrators, some of whom threw rocks at law enforcement, trying to get through police lines, and officers responding with volleys of tear gas that sent protesters fleeing, using rags dipped in vinegar to alleviate the sting to their eyes and skin. Late Thursday evening, firefighters were working to put out a raging inferno that broke out in an old building near the protests that were taking place in Plaza San Martin in downtown Lima, but its relationship to the demonstrators was not immediately clear. Images showed people rushing to get their belongings out of the building that was close to several government offices. As the sun set, fires smoldered in the streets of downtown Lima as protesters threw rocks at police officers who fired so much tear gas it was difficult to see. There was visible frustration among protesters who had hoped to march into the Miraflores district, an emblematic neighborhood of the economic elite. In Miraflores Park, a large police presence separated the anti-government protesters from a small group of demonstrators expressing support for law enforcement. Police fired tear gas there as well to disperse demonstrators.
Je te donne ce mon amour pour la vie entière, la promesse de me trouver à tes genoux. Aussitôt que tu m'appelles, rester toujours fidèle, c'est tout, c'est tout. Je te donne tous mes printemps, mes étés de mer, mes automnes quand les feuilles tombent partout. Si ce n'est pas une bonne affaire, je te donne tous mes hivers.
Sylvie Corbet and Jade Ledelay of the Associated Press brings us this final amuse-bouche here at the chef's table at West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. At least 1.1 million people protested on the streets of Paris and other French cities yesterday, Thursday, amid nationwide strikes against plans to raise the retirement age. But President Emmanuel Macron insisted he would press ahead with the proposed pension reforms. Emboldened by the mass show of resistance, French unions announced new strikes and protests on January 31st, vowing to try to get the government to back down on plans to push up the standard retirement age from 62 to 64. Macron said the measure, a central pillar of his second term, is needed to keep the pension system financially viable. But unions say it threatens hard-fought worker rights. Out of the country for a French-Spanish summit in Barcelona, Macron acknowledged the public discontent but said that we must do that reform to save French pensions. We will do it with respect, in a spirit of dialogue, but also determination and responsibility, he added. As Macron spoke, riot police pushed back against some protesters, throwing projectiles on the sidelines of the largely peaceful Paris march. Some other minor incidents briefly flared up, leading officers to use tear gas. Police said that 38 people in Paris were detained as a mass of people thronged the streets of the capital despite freezing rain. The crowd so big that it took hours to reach their destination. Retirees and college students joined the diverse crowd, united in their fear and anger over the reform. In a country with an aging population and growing life expectancy where everyone receives a state pension, Macron's government says the reform is the only way to keep the system solvent. Well, that brings us to the end of our broadcast period for the day and the week. But you do know Netroots Radio broadcasts on, and we will meet up here on Monday for River City Hash Mondays. So do stay tuned to Netroots Radio all day and all night for all the breaking news as it breaks, all weekend as well. And we will meet up here on Monday, right here, in West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. Bon appetit.
Je voudrais du soleil vert, des dentelles et des théères, des photos de bord de mer, dans mon jardin d'hiver. Je voudrais de la lumière, comme en Nouvelle-Angleterre. Je veux changer d'atmosphère, dans mon jardin d'hiver. À fleurs sous la pluie de novembre, tes mains qui courent, je n'en peux plus de t'attendre. Les années passent, qu'il est loin, là je tombe. Nul ne peut nous entendre. Je voudrais du Fred Astaire, revoir un latte Goël. Je voudrais toujours te plaire dans mon jardin d'hiver. Je veux déjeuner par terre, comme au long de golfe clair, t'embrasser les yeux ouverts dans mon jardin d'hiver. Pluie de novembre, tes mains qui courent, je n'en peux plus de t'attendre. Les années passent, il est loin, là je tombe. Nul ne peut nous entendre. Ba-da-da-dum-di-da-dum. 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 Dans mon jardin d'hiver. Ba-da-da-dum-di-da-dum. 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 Dans mon jardin d'hiver.